They're hearing the right noises for Republicans on the House side. This just in, CBS News projects Republicans have won a majority of the House of Representatives. Control of Congress is now split, with Democrats holding the majority in the Senate and Republicans taking control of the lower chamber. For more on this, I am joined by CBS News Congressional correspondent Nikole Killion. Nikole, now that it is more or less official, what can we expect from the Republican-controlled House coming out of the gate?
Well, I think we got a preview yesterday with the leadership votes that we saw conducted by House Republicans, where we saw rank-and-file members nominate Kevin McCarthy to become their next speaker. Now, granted, he fell short of the votes needed. He acquired 188 votes from members, 31 voted against him, but he told me that he does believe that he will get that full 218 votes by the time the new Congress convenes in January. What this also means is that there will have to be some decisions made by House Democrats. As you know, Speaker Nancy Pelosi has run this Congress and run the House. She has served as Speaker for a number of years on and off, and so she is at a point where she will have to make a decision about whether she will stay on in some capacity, in a leadership capacity. Certainly for many Democrats, until that decision is made, it has kind of frozen the field in terms of how things will shake out in terms of leadership on the Democratic side. John.
That's right. Ambitious Democrats are treading water, waiting for Speaker Pelosi to make her move. Sticking with the Republicans, though, for a moment, Nikole, even though Kevin McCarthy is about to become the Speaker, the role of a lifetime for him, help people understand the dynamic, because even though there are a handful of races still outstanding, he is not going to have an earth-shattering majority to work with. Help people understand how that might affect what Republicans are able to do in the House of Representatives.
Well, that's right. And he acknowledged that he wished the Republicans could have picked up more seats. And obviously, to your point, we don't know what that final count will be. But, you know, it's possible if they just pick up a few more seats, that still doesn't take them too far past that 218 seat majority. And so what that means is it will likely require a lot of negotiating by the potential new Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, should he assume that role, not only with his own conference, but in terms of reaching out on the other side of the aisle as well. You know, in terms of his own conference, so we do know that there have been challenges to him. For instance, there was a rules package that we saw House Republicans take up today. Some of the proposals that were put forth by a number of members from the conservative House Freedom Caucus would actually strip some of that power away from the Speaker, because many of those members want more of a seat at the table. So those are some of the dynamics that Kevin McCarthy has to contend with, not only, you know, in trying to keep moderates in line, but also the more right-wing members of his party who do have some issues with him, and making sure they stay in line as well if he wants to get anything done, not only, again, with his own conference, but again, having to reach across the aisle as well in terms of potentially sometimes needing Democratic support on some pieces of legislation if he can't get enough within his own caucus. So it is a very difficult thread to needle, or a difficult needle, I should say, to thread, if you will, in terms of some of the potential challenges that lie ahead.
That's right. The rules package being the procedures for the way the House does business and how much freedom the Speaker has to move. What do you hear, Nikole, about all of the investigations that Republicans talked about during the campaign? That seems to be, or would seem to be, inconsistent with the message from the campaign. Do you hear as much energy and enthusiasm for a whole swath of investigations into the Biden administration from Republicans who are now going to take control?
Well, I think undoubtedly you will see House Republicans be quite aggressive in terms of the types of investigations that they conduct, simply because this was one component of that Commitment to America plan that House Republicans rolled out a few weeks before the election. And Leader McCarthy made clear yesterday that he does intend or would like to see the party move forward on some of those, whether that is investigating the origins of COVID, looking into the withdrawal from Afghanistan, Afghanistan that resulted in more than a dozen service members being killed. Republicans are very anxious to do a deeper dive into the border and issues of immigration, and perhaps bring people like the Homeland Security Secretary in front of Congress. So I don't expect those priorities to go away as they take the majority.
And Nicole, just so I don't let the urgent crowd out the important quickly, in the Senate, they passed a measure to advance a bill that protects same-sex marriage. Can you give us a brief description of what happened there?
Yeah, so this was a very critical vote that we saw in the Senate. The House has already, of course, passed a measure that would codify marriage rights into law, and so now it's basically the Senate's turn. And so there have been a lot of discussions behind the scenes. They tabled the legislation prior to the election, but have since now taken it up again with a procedural vote today, which basically will allow debate on this piece of legislation, which would codify marriage rights into law by allowing states that already recognize same-sex marriage to be recognized in other states. It would also allow the federal government to recognize same-sex marriage in terms of where those marriages are performed. So it would be a huge step forward for those members of the LGBTQ community if this does eventually clear the Senate, although it would then have to be rectified with the House version. But either way, I know many advocates and proponents were excited by this first step. Unclear right now when the Senate will take up a final vote on this, so there's still a few more hurdles to clear before this potentially becomes law.
Nicole Killian covering it all for us on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Nicole.
You bet.